frustrating for a couple of players on the team. And that's something that this year, it's going to be interesting how Bruce Boudreau handles things, because this team, yes, Zuccarello is a great skater and East-West guy, especially, and elusive and things like that. But their speed this summer, Hartman can skate too. So the question is, did their speed significantly improve? That's going to allow them to really tinker with their system. I don't know if that answers your question to a whole, but his question definitely got me thinking about some of the issues that were around in the second half last season that may have also created a divide between the coach and the GM, because I don't think the GM was overly enamored the way that the Wild system was going late in the season, and I think some of the players as well. But, I think that everybody that might have been frustrated with the style the Wild played late in the season has to also understand that this team traded Granlund, Coyle, and Niederreiter, and all of a sudden they couldn't score. They had no Dumba. And I think Bruce Boudreau all of a sudden just hit the brakes, pulled everything back, and just tried to win 1-0, 2-1 games. And the Wild, obviously, in the second half, in the last couple months of the season, weren't good enough to do that.
Okay, 2 more questions. One from our friend Bill. Hope he brings his dad out to the show sometime soon. Pierre is the long openly auditioned for the Wild GM position. I can't see him as a candidate in any capacity given his long career as a broadcaster. He could tell you where just about all current NHLers played in juniors, though. So, Bill, I don't even know if it's a question. He doesn't like Pierre as a candidate.
I don't think that Pierre is a first-tier candidate. I think it's more, again, a lot of these things are getting intel. Trust me, Peter Chiarelli was never going to be a candidate here. It was why I actually... it's funny, as a reporter, sometimes it's like you learn something and it's interesting, you want to write it, but you also know that the guy is not a legitimate candidate, and it's going to be radioactive with the fans. So when I reported Hextall and Chiarelli the other day, I knew right away that, all right, this is not going to go well with the fan base. And I assumed that he wasn't a legitimate candidate, but the guy has been a GM a long time. He managed a team to a Stanley Cup. And sometimes it's not bad to get that guy in front of you and talk to him and find out the perception of what he thinks about your team or how he would fix it, and use it as intelligence to learn more about your team. And I think that's the same thing with Pierre. But with Chiarelli, it was kind of that way. I knew right away that there's just no way that they're going to take a guy that is essentially Fenton's buddy, or at least that's the perception out there, and make him the next GM of the team. It's just no way, because they know that stuff's going to come out. And also you saw the reaction of Oilers fans and things. So I think it's going to be very, very hard for Chiarelli to get a next GM job. I just, after the reaction the other day for Chiarelli's name being out there about the Wild, and every other GM seeing that, every other owner, I should say, it's going to be very hard for Peter to ever get the number 1 seed again, I think.
From Mighty Beer Hunter, how would you sell coming to Minnesota to GM candidates?
How would I sell it? Passionate fans, a lot of it off the ice stuff. Passionate fans, an incredible place to live. To me, that is the big thing about this job. And then a latitude. You're going to be a cap team. You're going to be given all the assets in the world, financial and otherwise, to try to make this team as good as you can off the ice to eventually get it on the ice. I know some Wild fans are always worried about a passionate owner and think he's meddling. Maybe he became a little more meddling than normal this year, because he was trying to essentially provide oversight when he started to really pick up on the red flags of Paul Fenton late in the season. But I don't think that's normally the case, where a GM has to, on every move, talk to the owner about everything. But to me, some would look at Craig Leopold as being a huge asset, having a passionate fan that's willing to spend to the cap. The other day I was doing something on Cap Friendly, and I saw the Wild under Craig Leopold have spent about $1.3 billion in payroll. And trust me, this is not a money-making enterprise here right now, especially the last couple of years when you don't have playoff success. So that would be the way. And then on the ice, I think that you're going to be, this team is. I was talking to, or I was reading Dom, or one of our analytics writers, with The Athletic the other day, and he basically said that he's not nearly as negative about what the Wild could do as most people. And then I was talking to a GM candidate right before this podcast that said, the last 4 or 5 years, this team was actually could have done a lot more than they did. That there is a lot to work with there now. Now, is the lineup as a roster as appealing as it was maybe a year ago? Probably not. But I don't think it's nearly as bad as everybody wants to make it out to be, including myself. I mean, like, I'm somebody that's partially to blame that because, you look around the division, you look around the conference, and you look at some of the guys that have been traded off this team and the fact that we haven't seen yet the best of a lot of these young kids, and you start to almost sound the alarms that this team is just crap. And so I'm part of that reason maybe for that perception. And I can tell you that when I talk to a lot of GM candidates or people that know the GM candidates here the last, couple weeks, I can tell you that, or it feels like a couple weeks. It's really only been about a week and a half. I can tell you the perception out there about the Minnesota Wild is a lot better than maybe some of us want to make it out to be.
Oh, good place to end. Michael Russo expressing optimism about the Minnesota Wild. That's fun. It's different. It's been quite a year, man. It's been quite a year, and that's like you said. There have been so many negative developments with the organization and with this team that it can be easy to forget. They do, the cupboard isn't completely bare. It just hasn't worked.
Yeah, and I will. You always ask me for final thoughts. I'll kind of find it. I'll have. This is my final thought on this, and hopefully it's not convoluted in the way that I say it. But a couple people, one of our buddies, Al, that loves to trash me on Twitter, has brought this up a couple times. Like, why didn't you sound the alarms or write about this or talk about this during the entire year, what you wrote in your Fenton piece the other day? And what I'll tell you is that, like, look, first of all, when you're covering a team, actually, all right, I'm going to tell you it's going to be convoluted, everything I say, because I just had 1,000 thoughts that went in my head. Like, first of all, nobody knows the chair that I'm in. And on the daily basis, the fires that I have to put out, that with every single story I write, the amount of calls and texts and battles that you have to have here. And I think it's been pretty well publicized here that this past year was a very tough year for me covering this team because of some of the conversations that I had behind the scenes with Paul and covering this team and just the battles there. But I feel that you had to be living in a hole here, especially if you listen to this podcast and didn't realize that there was a lot of madness going on behind the scenes here. I mean, I had not hidden the fact that the Rax deal was done really quickly and very poorly executed. I haven't hidden the fact that the Bitetto thing created a month long of mismanagement and drama behind the scenes. To get back to the Bitetto thing, the reason why that didn't make sense is that you had to acquire Bitetto, you were not allowed to bring back Eriksson Ek and Cunnin. So now right away you piss off those two players. You probably piss off the coach who had the team rolling before that in a large way because Eriksson Ek and Cunnin were playing well. Now all of a sudden because you screwed up and mismanaged this whole situation, you have to piss off the entire team by getting rid of Nate Prosser and essentially kicking him out of this franchise, and JT Brown, who I believe just had a baby a couple days before. And then you force essentially the coach to play Bitetto over Nick Seeler, who a week before that threw his body in front of 3 or 4 shots that led to a huge win in Colorado. So that one move of claiming a guy off waivers set this team into an absolute tailspin that led to one win in the first 10 games in February and essentially ruined the season. That is mismanagement. This is stuff I have said on the podcast. This is stuff I have written. I wrote for all month of February that they were singularly focused on Fiala. And by the way, I was not getting that from inside the organization. I have a lot of sources league-wide, and I had written for 3-4 weeks that it was going to be Fiala for Granlund and talked about it on here that I kept on hearing Fiala. So, like, this is stuff that I said. Now, maybe I didn't do it with as much detail as I did in the Fenton piece the other day, but I remember sitting in your apartment doing a podcast about 6 months ago, Jim, and I got a lot of crap from Wild fans on Twitter after we published the podcast. But I sat there for 30 minutes and bemoaned to you that my sense on Paul Fenton was that he had no plan, that he was shooting from the hip on every single move. And that's what we've sounded these alarms. So, to me, what I wrote the other day was not something that was absolutely new. And I think what was good here is that, essentially Craig Leopold and Matt Maka and these guys picked up on the fact that a lot of damage was done this year and eventually had to pull the plug. To go to the extreme of firing a GM after 1 year, admitting such a mistake, something that can be humiliating essentially to Craig Leopold for this decision, that's not nothing to take lightly. But what it also tells you as a fan is that the stuff that we've been talking about on this podcast the last year was not made up. It wasn't envisioned. It wasn't just because the beat writer and the GM weren't getting along. I mean, this is the reason why we weren't getting along was because I was writing and pointing this stuff out. So that's my final thought.
Good final thought. And it wasn't convoluted. It was on point. I'm glad you got to that. Great stuff from Michael as always. Again, next live show is August 13th, 7 o'clock at Tin Shed in Savage. Come on down and visit us. Thanks to all of our sponsors, and we will talk to you then.
Pretty little city built on a hillside. Music in the bars and fire in the sky. We went to the beach and it was covered in ice. And I used to call it home. So much coming out, there's nothing going in. I know that you feel like you're never gonna win. Oh, but the world won't forgive